Welcome to the West Goshen Township Board of Supervisors meeting on February 18, 2020 at 7 p.m. Could we all please stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So just a reminder to silence your cell phones and any other devices that might make noise during our meeting. And also to know that the audience members may be audio or video recorded by third parties during this public meeting. I'm going to quickly go through this chair statement on meeting conduct and public comment, and we just basically request that you actually follow along. So we have a resolution 11/2019, which is explains how we work our public comment. And so the West Goshen Township residents and taxpayers may make comment on any agenda item that requires a vote by the supervisors. West Goshen Township residents and taxpayers may speak for 2 minutes per item at the chair's direction or at the request of another board member. A speaker may be granted additional time. The Board of Supervisors reserves the right to not engage in a question and answer dialogue with speakers. Comments are meant to be declaratory in nature and not interrogatory. Regulations for comment on items not on the agenda. Again, West Goshen Township residents and taxpayers may make comment during the public comment, which is usually at the end of our meeting, period, on any item not on the agenda. West Goshen Township residents interested in providing comment during this period shall submit their statements to the Township Manager at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting so the Board and Township staff may be prepared to answer your questions. West Goshen Township residents and taxpayers may speak for 2 minutes per item, and at the chair's discretion or at the request of another board member, a speaker may be granted additional time. The Board of Supervisors reserves the right not to engage in a question and answer dialogue with speakers. Comments are meant to be declaratory in nature and not interrogatory. General regulations. No individual shall make offensive, insulting, threatening, insolent, slanderous, or obscene remarks or act in a boisterous manner or make threats against any person or against any public order and security. If an individual shall refuse to yield the floor when their allotted time has expired or refuse to adhere to the protocols of decorum and order by yelling or commenting when they have not been recognized by the board chairperson to speak, he or she will be asked to leave the meeting by the board chairperson and, if necessary, be removed by the sergeant of arms, who shall be a township police officer present at each meeting. Okay, for the moment, we're going to change. We don't actually have it on the agenda at the moment, but we want to recognize a long-term person in our township who has served, how many years is it? Is celebrating his 50th year. He started when he was like 15 years old, right?
Yes.
I don't know. How are you?
You tricked me.
Over here. Yeah, bring her up. Absolutely. Derek, do you have the video? Just so they can, oh, come on. We want you in the camera so we can highlight you. Turn them towards Derek.
That way, Joe.
Joe has been the chair for many years on the zoning hearing board from 1970 to 2020. And we are just delighted and very proud to have you as one of our residents and citizens, and also for the tremendous amount of work you've put forward during those 50 years. I want to thank you for your service.
Yeah, where's the food?
Here's some cannolis.
I never dressed like that.
You did a nice job. You're very handsome.
Okay, he did a pretty good job. I just want to say it's always been an honor to be a part of West Goshen Township. And I've seen many changes and for the better. And this is a complete surprise to me, so I'm just at a loss for words, which is unusual because when I'm sitting up there, I have a lot to say. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we'll start with item number 5, which is reports for the month of January 2020. Now, Commander will be making this presentation on behalf of Chief Gleason.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The West Goshen Police Department report for the month of January 2020. We responded to 2,022 calls. 59 of those were alarms, 4 of which were valid. 25 reportable motor vehicle crashes, 44 were non-reportable, and we patrolled 14,977 miles throughout the township. In continuing our career development program, we send officers to the following training: our monthly emergency response team, SWAT training, Command Leadership Academy, on-suit collision investigation, which is a first part of a 4-level training for crash investigation and crash reconstruction, drug interdiction and conducting complete traffic stops, mobile crime platform demonstration, search and seizure class, and a NADRO. As Chief Police announced in the last couple of meetings, we're adding a police officer to the Juvenile and Community Relations Unit. So the NADRO, which stands for National Association of School Resource Officers, they're required to have, any officers that are working in the schools are required to have that national certification. Traffic enforcement continues throughout this township. Amongst a few of the selected enforcement areas, we patrolled enforcement on Airport Road, Spruce Avenue, Montgomery Avenue, Westmoreland Road, Mackenzie Drive, North New Street, Grove Road, and Silver Road. And just one quick announcement. I know we've been talking about the Citizens Police Academy, so the West Goshen Police Department's Citizens Police Academy will once again be held from March 24th, or will be beginning March 24th of this year. Applications are still being accepted until the end of the month. They can be gotten on our website, or you can go to the police department in the front lobby. The applications open at any civilians. However, the West Goshen Township residents are to take priority in the class. If we do get that many, then we have to start prioritizing the pupils. And that is all I have.
I have a question for you.
Yes, sir.
I noticed on the mileage for this month, it was kind of significantly down versus the typical average for a month, certainly for the same mileage for the same month last year. Is there a particular reason for that?
It could be a few reasons. One, there could have been there was less travel training, so the mileage is taken from all the cars. So there's less travel training or less runs to all our crime labs are in Harrisburg now, so they're still working on Lima. Lima is supposed to be open back in March, or coming up in March, but we've been hearing every month that's being pushed off. So there could be less runs to Harrisburg and back. The other crime lab is up in Willow Road, so that could be a big one there.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Fire Marshal's report, including Goshen Fire Company and Good Fellowship Ambulance Company, presented by Fire Marshal Andrew Testa.
Thank you. Good evening. For the month of January, there were a total of 29 inspections, 8 commercial use and occupancy, 5 walkthrough, 3 sprinkler, 6 framing, 3 fire alarm, 3 residential finals, 1 kitchen hood, and 1 sprinkler break. We had 7 fire calls for the month, 1 building fire, 5 fire alarms, and 1 appliance fire. I had 1 fire call follow-up and attended 4 meetings. The Goshen Fire Company had 27 calls for the month and 108 EMS calls for the month. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item is building officials report, presented by building official John Beswick. Oh, actually, no, he's got to stand in. Oh, hi, Mike.
Good evening. I'm not John Beswick. I'm Mike McCarthy, building inspector, also downstairs for Codes Department. And for the month of January, we issued a total of 179 permits, 135 residential, 44 commercial, 7 single-family dwellings, 29 building permits, 34 electrical, 7 fire protection, 24 HVAC, 25 plumbing, 3 roofing, 2 zoning, 21 use and occupancy for 152 permits total, which totaled a construction cost of $11,446,278. Also issued 3 erosion and soil permits, 13 sewer tapping permits, 11 open space permits for a total of 179 permits, which totaled permit fees of $954,610.82. That's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, turning to item number 6, Board of Supervisors announcements. John, would you like to start on your end of the table tonight?
Sure. Just want to announce that Ashley and I had the opportunity to take a tour of the West Goshen Township facilities. We went met with Mark Tolami, the street superintendent, along with Mike Caraco. Sorry, butchering their name. I'm terrible for names. And we also had the opportunity to meet with Chief Joseph Gleason and had a tour of the police department over here. And I also had the opportunity to visit the sewer plant as well. Very informative. And one thing that I found that we could do better at and need to continue on, and that is continuing the efforts that have already been initiated on the part of township employees to become more energy efficient, and specifically in the area of changing over lighting to all LED lighting. And that's something I encourage all the folks that I met with, National and I met with, to go ahead and pursue that and let us know if there's anything we at the board can do to help assist in that effort.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep, I just have one announcement. So Derek and I met to talk about some updates that we had in mind for the township website. So we're going to be looking at different hosts, different vendors over the next year. Some of the feedback that I've been getting is that people really want to see online bill pay. And so personally, I think that that's something that I think we would like to bring to the township at some point. We're going to be keeping that, in mind as we look for different vendors over the next few months.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add one other thing with that? The other thing that we impressed and asked when we went through the tours of all 3 different departments is about how we could transition to electric vehicles and how that could be accomplished. So that's another issue that we discussed with all those folks that we met with.
Thank you. I don't have any other announcements.
I have 3 announcements. On January the 22nd, I had the opportunity to attend the Township Pension Committee meeting. Hugh was in attendance as our liaison with the committee. And I have to say I came away very impressed with the work of that committee and the investment advisor, Vanguard. Vanguard has been in place for the last 11 and a half years, so since 2008. They've been our advisor with the committee. And that time period obviously includes the Great Recession of 2008-2009. And those pension funds for this township, so uniform, non-uniformed, and sewer staff, all 3 funds have had an annual rate of return of approximately 7%, which is fabulous management. So it's an excellent performance. I would like to publicly thank and acknowledge the current members of the Pension Committee, together with Hugh, for their strong stewardship as volunteers for this important aspect of township governance. And the Pension Committee members are currently Mr. David Brune, Mr. Bob Holland, Mr. Robert Scheller, and Mr. Walker Tompkins. So well done to all of them. It's a very impressive thing that they've been taken care of for the last 10 years or so. Well done to you. They did it? Yeah, well, good. I'm glad I recognize them. Second announcement, on February the 10th, Hugh and I, together with some township staff, met with the managing partner and our audit partner from Barbicane, Thornton and Company, who are our township audit firm. We discussed with them public concerns arising from the recent discovery of fraudulent activities at Kennett Township, the type and extent of audit work performed by different townships, the risk assessment and testing of internal controls by the audit team at West Goshen, and the use of management letters and auditor discussion with supervisors on audit report outcomes. And I asked that they present on these topics to the full board and to the public at one of our regular scheduled board meetings They were very happy to do so, and it was agreed that they would come to the regular April meeting of the board to present and answer questions that people might have. So I think the overall work that they do, the difference between the type of audit that they do for our township versus what is done at Kennet and others is quite substantial, and I think the board will obviously have questions, and I encourage anyone in the audience who would like to know more to also attend on that meeting. My last announcement is the fact that on January the 29th, I and many other members of the board attended the public presentation by Cadmus, who is a renewable energy consulting company. They've been performing the work on behalf of the Westchester Area Council of Governments, and they presented their findings on their study, shared the results of the analysis and the strategy recommendations, and obtained some public feedback. A final report will be issued for approval, hopefully by the February 27th meeting of the COG, and that will then be discussed and reviewed with individual municipalities. So I'd like to suggest to the board that we dedicate our Wednesday, April 1st workshop meeting to review that report and consider the recommendations.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Any comments from anyone on the board? Any public comment? Hearing none, we have a first and a second, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
I only have one comment. Casey and I attended a meeting with the officers of the Goshen Fire Company, and they are in a situation where their finances are in peril. Not disastrously, but they are slipping. And it has to do with the number of volunteers that are available. The number of volunteers are slipping, so that they've had to convert or transition to some paid ambulance drivers and some paid firemen. We're going to get an analysis from them, and it'll be looked at further. That's all I had to say, really.
Thank you for that follow-up. I know it's an important issue to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Part of my life.
Yeah. In your service. All right, we're going to move to item number 7, Township Manager's announcements.
Good evening, everyone. I have several announcements. Tonight, the board met in executive session to discuss litigation. Number 2, as you may have noticed out on Boot Road, Sunoco is gearing up for their construction of their horizontal directional drilling. They finished up their eastbound drilling earlier this year, and they're setting up to do the westbound leg, which will connect with West Whiteland Township. Ultimately, they'll make the connection around Boot Road and Chip Road in West Whiteland. We don't know when they're going to actually start drilling, but as of today, the drill rig was in the upright position, so that means it's going to start any day now. We don't know when. Sunoco has not been forthcoming with notifying us about much of anything. So if we see anything out of the ordinary, we contact them and try to get some information, but it's not forthcoming typically. And I've updated the township website, our Sunoco pipeline page, with the most recent information. Once we know the construction is going to start, we'll update the page again. Also, we are tabling 2 of the items on the agenda. Number 12, the Luxor apartment building interior parking space size discussion has been tabled at the request of the applicant. And number 20, the final land development plan for Roslyn Swim Club is tabled until further notice. Would the board like some discussion on that? I think we should, personally.
I would agree. Yes, you should.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz, for your notice yesterday. We were off because of the holiday. I want to turn it over to Rick, Bill, and if Derek wants to throw in as well on the discussion about Roslyn Swim Club. So Rick, please. Thank you.
Yesterday we were notified that there was some land clearing work going on at the Roslyn Swim Club. We have been for a couple of months now reviewing a land development plan for a new parking lot at the swim club. That plan had been reviewed, commented on, revised, and recommended for approval by the Planning Commission at their meeting last week for approval by the Board of Supervisors. That approval has not yet happened since the Board of Supervisors meeting is tonight. The land clearing started yesterday with no approvals from the township, which is a violation of the land development process. So upon hearing of that issue, Mr. Webb and Mr. Davis and I all went out to the site to document what had occurred. A bit of clearing had been done, a number of trees had been removed, 9 of which are not supposed to be removed at all. So we issued immediately a cease and desist order to the contractor to stop working. We documented the work that's been done, and we contacted the owner of the property as well as the contractor and advised them of the violations and advised them that no further work was to proceed, that the land development plan would need to be modified based on the work that was done in violation of the lack of approvals. And we also issued 2 citations, one to the contractor and one to the swim club for the violations noted today. So that's kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's pretty.
If you have any other questions, we could answer them.
They have to go back to conditional use, go through that whole procedure again?
Well, not conditional use, there is no conditional
It
use.
should just be land development?
They are going to have to go through land development because unfortunately, part of their approval was the fact that they were maintaining a mature deciduous tree growth area as a buffer, and that buffer was essentially destroyed yesterday. So now that buffer no longer exists, and a different type of buffer is going to need to be constructed in its place, which is different from the plan that was to have been approved tonight. So they're going to have to revise the plan, put a vegetative buffer in there, and go back to the Township Planning Commission, and then bring it back to the Board of Supervisors. I would assume that that process will probably take 1 to 2 months to complete.
So just a question that prompts to me is, okay, you know, they jump the gun would be one thing, but to actually jump the gun and start removing things that weren't even on the plan, what's the contractor's explanation for that?
Contractor had no explanation. Contractor was not provided a copy of the plan. The owner did not have a copy of the plan to provide to him. I don't know why. And the contractor didn't bother to determine whether or not a permit had been issued. So he worked without knowledge of whether a permit had been granted. So he didn't have a plan to know what he was supposed to be doing, and he didn't have an approval to do anything in the first place. He just went on the advice of the owner, who also had no approvals to proceed with the work.
So if I can just ask a question, what are our options as a board during the land development process then with Roslyn Swim Club? Do we have, I mean, can we insist, I think this was brought up at some point, that we insist that they replant a certain number of trees, if not more?
We've discussed this today, and what we're going to suggest is that since the deciduous buffer has been removed, be replaced with a standard zoning criteria dual row of evergreens, which is the normal vegetative buffer that's installed if there are no trees in place to begin with. In addition, I want those 9 trees replaced that were taken out. They were all mature trees, some of them up to 24 inches in diameter, and unfortunately, you can't replace those. I mean, we can put new trees in, but they're going to be, 3-inch caliber, not 24. So it's going to be our recommendation through, again, the land development process that we have a coniferous vegetative buffer in accordance with the zoning ordinance. There was going to be a fence. We won't need a fence with the vegetative buffer. And then that those 9 trees be restored somewhere else on the site.
Are the trees already, have the stumps pulled out, or are they still standing?
The stumps are still in, but the trees are gone.
Okay. And so will there be issues related to erosion and a lot of mess in that area?
Well, that's another thing. The contractor didn't bother to put any erosion and sedimentation controls in place before doing the clearing. So we met with them first thing this morning and demanded that those controls be in place by the end of work today, which they worked with. So the ENS controls are now in place, so we're not concerned about erosion at this point. But the stumps are going to have to come out. I mean, you can't just leave them there and deteriorate, so they're going to have to be removed.
Okay. Any questions from anyone in the audience? Of the staff? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item. Unless, did you have anything else from an announcement
That was
standpoint?
it, thank you very much.
Okay. Then we will turn to the township engineers' comments on stormwater. Give us the good news.
Well, we have some news, whether it's good or not, depends on your point of view. But after a long wait, we finally received our new MS4 stormwater permit on January the 31st, which we've been in the process of trying to get for the last 2.5 years. So we did receive it, we have it in writing, and since we do now have that permit in hand, we immediately began to go out for proposals for design work on stormwater projects that have been lined up to meet the requirements of our MS4 permit. The first 2 projects that we're out for proposals on are actually 2 grant-funded projects under the ME2 grant that we were successful in receiving last year. Again, we didn't really want to start those projects until we had the permit in hand because there was no guarantee that we would get credit for those until the permit had been issued. So now that it's issued, we're getting proposals. We should have those proposals in a week or 2, hopefully have them to the board at the next meeting so that we can get started with the design. Those 2 projects consist of retrofitting 2 existing stormwater basins in the Idlewild neighborhood in the northwest part of the township. And the second project is a riparian buffer restoration project at the sewer authority plant in the southwestern part of the township. In addition to getting proposals for those projects, we have a list of projects approved in the permit for our TMDL PRP plan, which was also approved as part of the permit. And we're going to be meeting with staff to prioritize those projects and determine what timeframes we need to start those designs so that those projects can be designed, bid, and implemented within the required 5-year period that we have to do them. So that'll be the next step.
Can you tell us what the grant amounts are?
Not exactly, but the basin was roughly $217,000, and the riparian buffer was somewhere around 130, I believe.
130.
Yeah. And those are 100% grant funded, so no township funds involved. It's 100% grant funding, which, quite frankly, is unheard of, but we lucked out with the ME2 grant, and we were lucky enough to get 2 grants. So,
does the grant funding cover the design cost or just the
design and construction, 100%. Yeah.
Who takes care of the design?
We are requesting proposals from qualified engineering firms for the designs, and we'll review those proposals when we get them and make a recommendation to the board as to who we recommend to do the design. It will be done by a consulting engineering firm. We don't have available staff time to do the designs of that magnitude. And the same will occur for future projects. The other projects as they come online will also be mostly designed by a consultant. We may do 1 or 2 of the smaller ones in-house, but they'll mostly be designed by a consultant.
So I have a question for Rick and the board, really. So we have our upcoming workshop in March, which we have not specifically identified a topic for yet. So maybe a review of the MS4 permit, a little bit more detail, an overview of we have a substantial project coming up on Ravens Lane this year that's already in flight, stormwater related, a little bit more flesh on the bones around both of these elements of the projects we need to do in the 5-year time horizon together with the ones for the grant. Might be good to have a good public discussion in detail on those and reach out to Glen Acres residents about the fact that our project's one we've got planned for the spring and summer, and to invite them to attend if they can and have a conversation about the work. It seems a good topic to do that.
Quick question, do you still have, you must still have the stormwater presentations from 17, 18, I believe?
Yes.
Have they been updated so we could utilize that as part of the presentation?
Haven't really been updated, but they're still relevant.
They're relevant the way they are?
Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great.
Were there any surprises in the final permit in terms of language or type, anything that wasn't expected from your perspective?
Not really. The cover letter has some language in it that's a little bit confusing, but I think that's typical DEP, and I don't think it really amounts to anything. We are going to contact the department and clarify that that's the case, but no, there's nothing new, and our plans were approved and submitted. And just as an aside, we investigated a sinkhole complaint today in another part of the township, and it turns out that it's a corrugated metal stormwater pipe collapse in the front yard. So it continues.
Which neighborhood was that in, Ray?
I'm sorry?
Which neighborhood was that?
Farmington,
Spring. It's cul-de-sac.
and that's Spring.
It's off of Mall Lane,
It's
north
off
of Mall Lane. Spring something Drive. Yeah. So it's a 6 foot wide by 4 foot
Spring
high
Valley.
corrugated.
Spring
pipe.
Valley?
Spring Valley Circle.
Yes.
Okay. And it looks like we're going to have to replace about a 20-foot section of it. It's 2 collapsed areas.
Pine Valley Circle.
Pine Valley Circle,
Pine Valley.
I'm sorry. Spring Valley, Pine Valley. They all run together.
But I guess just as an end note on this, since we have, and this is an agenda item tonight, a sustainability sort of outlook for the township, I guess all I ask, or I'm going to put my input in here, is that whatever plans are drawn up to retrofit these basins and the buffers, that we keep our eye out for contractors who will do more sustainably minded design for those.
Well, the contractor doesn't do the design. We hire a consultant to do the design. And the designs are green infrastructure designs. That's specifically intended that way. And that's the way the projects were submitted to DEP. And they are all green infrastructure projects.
Okay, great.
Do you have anything on Greystone?
Not really. Nothing notable happened between now and last month. They're continuing with housing construction. The road's open. The road is not being heavily used yet by other than construction traffic, which is probably a good thing. But it is open to public traffic, and the traffic signals are operational. And that work's going to continue for the next 5+ years.
But it is not a dedicated public street yet.
It is not dedicated yet.
Correct. Neither of the signals, although they're in operation.
Yeah, the next work to proceed, which we don't know when they're going to start, we expect it to happen by now, and it hasn't, is the work on the first dam rehabilitation. That's going to be the next infrastructure work to occur. And that could start at any time, but they're waiting for one final approval from DEP on the cold weather concrete methods.
Is there just one dam?
3
There's 3, okay.
All 3 need to be
At the same,
rehabilitated.
it will happen all at the same time, or?
No, one at a
Okay.
time.
Okay.
Dam 181, which is the larger dam to the south that's breached, is going to be first, and then the other 2 will follow after that.
So if it snows tomorrow or whatever, is Aram Avenue going to be?
Still the responsibility of the developer to clear the road, so it's still private property.
Yeah, it still is the developer's property until it's dedicated to the township.
Yeah, that'll be a decision by the board at a public meeting to take dedication of that street, so we're not ready to do that.
The development agreement specifies that it's the developer's responsibility to snow plow until it's dedicated.
Anything else?
No,
Then we'll
that's
turn to
good.
Mr. Webb, zoning officer's report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regard to the zoning hearing board, we met here last week. They heard 1198 Phoenixville Pike. The zoning hearing board had granted that relief. Basically, the applicant had wanted concurrence that the zoning hearing board had previously given relief to that, which our 50-year vet had probably sat on that hearing back in the 80s when they were before them. Beyond that, We have not received any new applications, so we are going to be on a little bit of a break, I would say. But I want to take a moment, and in my almost 20 years, Joe, the way you lead our zoning hearing board, over the top. You are one of the best chairs I've ever worked with. And by your members coming out tonight, that just shows the kind of person you are. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll now turn to item number 10, the approval of the Board of Supervisors meeting minutes of December 17th, 2020, January 21st of 2020, and February 5th of 2020. Should we go through each one of them individually?
You can do them as a whole or go through individually.
Okay.
It's up to you, it's up to the chair.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes of the 3 meetings.
All three?
Yes.
No, I'll second.
Okay. Any public comment on the meeting minutes? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Okay, the next item on the agenda is the approval of the Treasurer's Report dated January 31st, 2020. For the General Fund, the Sewer Revenue Fund, the Waste and Recycling Fund, and the Capital Reserve Fund, and the bills to be paid from these funds.
I make a motion that they be approved.
We have a motion? A second. And a second. Any public comment on the Treasurer's Report? Yes, Ms. Workman.
Hey, good evening. Margie Swart. I just have a couple questions. On page 3, we received revenue in the amount of $512,000. $500,000. No, $500, sorry, from Luxor. What was that for?
Luxor is the apartment building going in on Mount Exeter. I'm sorry. Luxor is the apartment building going in at Mount Lacken 202. The $512,500 is the open space fees, $2,500 per unit, 203 units.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Where can I find that amount in the 2020 budget as a revenue?
It's not in the, we expected that revenue in 2019, and it got here late, so it wouldn't be in the 2020 budget.
Was it reflected in the 2019 budget?
We didn't receive it in the 2019 budget, so we did not reflect it there.
Okay. It just brings me back to, I believe I made a comment during budget season that we have this account, a restricted part capital account that has roughly $600,000 in, but that's not included in our annual budget. And I would just like to see if we have revenues in that sum, $500,000.
We never received money like that.
That it should be somewhere in the budget. And then on the building report, sewer tapping and connection fees.
Can you reference the page?
Well, this was actually the builder's report, the building official's report.
It's in the other packet.
It shows that we received $828,000 roughly for sewer tapping and connection fees. However, our 2020 connection fee budget revenue was only $15,000. So how was our budget at just $15,000, but we've already received $828,000?
Again, we expected the Luxor money to come in 2019.
Actually, I think it's in the sewer authority's budget.
It's in the sewer authority's budget as
If
well.
you look at the 2020 budget for the sewer authority, the Luxor tapping fees in there.
Okay, is it possible to put the sewer authority budget online, please?
That's not our budget to do that. You'd have to ask the authority.
It may be part of that report back from December, the treasurer's report for the sewer authority. It's not, but it online.
And then going forward, so the township receives the sewer connection fees in our sewer fund, but the tapping fees go to the sewer authority.
Correct.
So if those amounts could just be broken out, it would make it a whole lot easier to see where that money's coming in. That would be great. And then Mr. Webb's doing such a great job on rental inspection fees. I see in January we had $22,000 in revenue, and that's half of our annual budget. So is that typical going forward, that we would receive half of our revenues?
So the rental registrations are due December 30th. Sometimes we don't get them all.
Right.
So that's where you're seeing such a large chunk of income at the very beginning of the year, because it's the rental registration fee that's due. And I added 60 more, by the way, just recently.
So that's actually a registration fee, not necessarily that you were out there doing thousands of inspections.
You know, but we did probably did over 1,000 last year.
And then on page 2 of the treasurer's report, transfer to capital reserve, $2.1 million basically. I believe our budget was $1.7 million to transfer from general fund to capital fund. And that's what it shows on
I
the
have to
transfer.
check, I don't have those numbers in front of me.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me extra time. This is, I think, the only time I'm speaking tonight, so I appreciate it. The transparency website shows for January online that there was 1.7 million transferred in January. However, this report is showing 2.1. So if we could just look at that. And then I brought this up in years past, but this is a new board. So I would just like to point out that the second class township code, section 3202 of that annual budget, it does say that the Board of Supervisors may, by resolution, transfer unencumbered monies from one township account to another. However, transfers shall not be paid during the first 3 months of the fiscal year. So I'm curious as to why our second township class code prohibits transfers from one fund to the other within the first 3 months. But we seem to do that every couple of years. And then one last thing, my last item is, I oftentimes like to go back and review the previous month's treasurer's report to compare it to December or January. So when I went back to December today online, I was unable to find the information I was looking for because pages 1 and 3 are missing from the December treasurer's report online. And that would show the balances of that restricted park fund that I was interested in learning about, and also end of year totals that I always like to see the end of year totals, but it's not included online. So if that could be fixed, I'd certainly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, very good.
Just so that I understand, what is restricted parks?
Restricted parks, back in the, way before all of us, the board established a $2,500 fee per dwelling unit for a fee in lieu of establishing a park on a parcel. So Luxor doesn't have any room to put a park in, so they pay us $2,500 per unit. So we can either, it's very specific as to what you can do with the money. You can buy open space, rehabilitate parks, maintain parks. So developers pay us instead of having to, I mean, for 203 people, they'd have to put in.
Right, so it's part of your subdivision land development ordinance. You get the authority to have that requirement based on the municipality's planning code. In order to do so, you have to, as part of any subdivision or land development, you have to either provide on the land that you're developing sufficient land area for open space recreational purposes for the residents or inhabitants of the development, or if you cannot, because land isn't suitable, it's not the right size, it's all floodplain, whatever, you have the option to pay a fee in lieu of providing the open space. So your fee in lieu of open space is designated by a resolution that was adopted, and that number is not just pulled out of thin air. There has to be a study done of the value of the land in West Goshen to purchase for open space purposes. There's a very detailed process that the board had to go through to adopt the ordinance and to adopt the resolution. And now when developments come in, that's usually part of their subdivision land development approval, you designate either they're providing the land on their own plan or they're paying you the fee in lieu of open space. That money has to be separated and segregated into a separate account. It is not part of your general fund that you can use for whatever. It's very specific what the MPC allows you to use those funds for.
questions from any of the board members? Any comments from the public? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so item 12 is no longer on our agenda. We need to give an overview as to why it's on that.
It was just withdrawn by the applicant, so.
Okay, all right, so we'll move on then to number,
Was that withdrawn forever? Or just tabled?
I'm not sure. I think it's been withdrawn, but we'll see.
okay, so then we're going to turn to item number 13, which is a continued discussion on a draft ordinance for Westchester University overlay project.
So I can jump in. Obviously, it's your last work session. You had a conversation. The whole work session was dedicated to this ordinance. Residents from the Roslyn neighborhood had hired David Babbitt as a land planner who had some comments and suggestions. He did send correspondence dated February 9th. I had reviewed that. We also received correspondence from Brian Nagel on behalf of the university. I had put together a memorandum to the board basically explaining the revisions that I made based on the comments from the board at the work session, suggestions made by David Babbitt, as well as by Mr. Nagel. So I'm happy to go over. I had provided a red line version of the ordinance, and I can go starting with that. Since I sent this to the board in your packet, I did receive emails from both Mr. Walsh and Mr. Hellman with some questions, and I'm happy to go through some of those comments, and there's some policy discussion and decisions that have to be made. So as far as the changes that I made, and I did make a misstatement, and I apologize at the work session, this ordinance was set up to just be an overlay district. And there was discussion back and forth, and I wasn't clear on how we had resolved it. There's pros and cons to doing it both ways. The way it's set up now, the underlying R3 district will remain, and the underlying I2 district will remain. The positive about that is that, especially in the I2 district, there are many uses today that are not university uses, and they're properties that are privately owned that have uses that would not otherwise be permitted if we just labeled it as PUC District 4. Non-conforming uses are really not favored under zoning, and they're really limited and prohibited from expanding, but for following the non-conforming sections of your zoning ordinance. So it really hinders those properties from being able to utilize their property the way they've been lawfully developed. And so we thought that that probably was not a positive thing to do. The concern that I think the residents have by keeping underlying R3, and I know this was a comment from both Mr. Walsh and Mr. Hellman, we have educational uses, the way it's currently defined, is being revised in this ordinance. It will no longer include university uses. So educational uses will be limited to Westchester School District, any other public or private institution, except for universities. So in the R3 district and in all of our other districts that we allow educational uses by conditional use, that will remain, but that term will no longer allow university uses. So it's not really going to matter for the R3 portion that's zoned PUC1 because the university can do university uses there, or a non-university use can have an educational use by conditional use. So in the PUC1, it's not that significant of a change because there's only one parcel that's not university owned. PUC2, there's very few that are not university owned. 3, there's a little bit more that aren't, and then 4, there's half and half. So we think it's best, our recommendation is to have it as an overlay district. And by saying that, I mean that the underlying either R3 district or I2 district will remain. So that point is made clear on page 6 of the ordinance, right after the block in the center of the page or 3/4 of the way. It says the underlying zoning district for the above parcels shall remain the same. So everything that's in R3 today will be R3. The parcels that are identified as PUC1 will have an overlay of PUC1, which will allow all the uses that are designated in Section 5 as far as uses. I'm sorry, it's not 5. Section on page 10, Section 84-135 is the use regulations. A is what's allowed in District Class 1. So parcels today that are zoned R3, that are also zoned District Class 1, you either can do the R3 uses, which would be an educational use by something other than university, or you could utilize the PUC District Class 1 uses, which are the university uses. For 2, 3, and 4, 2 and 3 are zoned R3. So again, those properties can continue to be developed in accordance with the R3 regulations, which will allow educational uses for non-university. And then under PUC 2, 3, and 4, they'll be allowed to do the uses that are set forth on pages 11 and 12, depending on which sub-district you're located in. Does that make sense?
Yes, just one clarifying question, and Kristen, I know you. So, is in the ordinance where R3 is described, are the definitions in there that still would describe educational use permitting?
No, it just has the use regulation says by conditional use you're allowed an educational use.
Okay, then so the only place that's really called out is here on page 9 in this overlay that defines this restricted.
On page 9 is the definition of educational use.
It's a new definition.
A new definition, which very explicitly states.
Right, so, okay.
So as long as it's not part of an ordinance that explains educational use, which would be inconsistent with this definition that you're saying.
Yeah, this is a new definition. Now, one thing that we've not done that I started today is that 84-5710 today is your conditional use regulation specific to educational uses. And I always knew that we needed to go back and look at that. There are very few references, or some references, but very few, that need to come out of that section because they deal with things that only a university would have. And I started on an amendment to that. We didn't want to get too far down that path because we wanted to make sure this was going to go forward. So I still think this ordinance can go forward with the review process while we're working on the other amendment. For example, today an educational use, and this is sort of where we started with this process, requires a minimum lot area of 10 acres. Educational uses, that may be too large. So for a small charter school or an elementary school, like I don't know if the Goddard School has 10 acres. There might be some uses today that probably don't have 10 acres. The 10 acres came from, we were thinking of university uses. I wasn't here when that ordinance was drafted, but that was what I was thinking, that because that definition was so broad to include university uses, a lot of the area and bulk requirements seem rather large and probably can be tailored down if now we're not talking about university uses. So again, if this goes forward, we pretty much immediately need to sit with staff and your planning commission and work through some, I don't think very large edits to 84, 5710, but there are some edits that will need to be made.
So there's more work to be done, but we know what we need to do. Just want to make it clear that the line that's the new line that we're looking at now, that's the line, that's the demarcation line. The university will not be able to acquire or build beyond that line. Let me make that clear.
Let's say there's property abutting, well, there isn't abutting, let's say Norfolk and north of Norfolk and east of Church. There's a 2-lot property there. If they buy that, you're saying that there's really nothing they can do with it. If they were to buy it, let's say 6 months, then this is all.
Is it in any one of these PUC classes?
It's adjacent. Let's say they buy it. It's an R3.
They can use it for R3 uses, which would not include a university use.
So all they can do is buy and rent it. If they wanted to buy property, they can still buy property.
Yeah, you can't stop them from buying property. Zoning regulates the use of property, not the ownership. Okay, so going back to the changes. Okay, so on page... Okay, so throughout, there were some times where the word overlay was not used. So I made sure consistently throughout the district is being called Planned University Main Campus Overlay District, which is an absolute mouthful. So that's what we like to call the PUC district. But I went through and made sure that that was in. One other comment, and this actually came from a David Babbitt comment, was that the word auditorium was defined but not used and was not allowed anywhere. He had thought that there was an overlap between student rep uses and the student union building. Staff and I met and talked about that. We think those uses are distinct, and we do think there should be 2 separate definitions for that. We think that auditorium should be something that's allowed, and we think the PUC district is an appropriate place for that. So on page 11, I've added that as an allowable use in the PUC 1. There is today, most likely in the Psych Student Union Building, I know there's an auditorium. Whether it has that minimum number of seats, I don't know, but I don't think that that's a use that's inappropriate in the PUC 1, but that's obviously your call. No other uses have been changed. The area and bulk requirements on page 12, we made it clear, and this was a clarification. On page 12, under 84-136A, I added the underlying sentence, when calculating the area and bulk requirements, all lands within District Class 1, which are owned by the university or an entity affiliated with the university, shall be used. I carried that language over onto page 13 under paragraph B, which regulates the area and bulk for District Class 2, 3, and 4. There is a policy discussion question that I did speak with Tim from Bernardin on, and that is when measuring the area and bulk for the master plan, if you're looking at District Class 2, do you want to look at 2, 3, and 4 combined? Or do you just want to focus on the land that's in 2, focus on the land that's on 3, and focus on the land that's on 4? Tim's suggestion is that you look at all of the land that the university owns. That's not the way I drafted it.
You mean to determine the aggregate proportion?
Yes. Because again, from a master planning concept, the idea was, well, don't just isolate a lot or lots, look at all of the campus. So, I see pros and cons of doing it both ways.
Class 3 is a lot of athletic fields and open areas. So if you aggregate that in, you could basically completely densify Class 2 and Class 4.
Yeah. That's true. Okay.
And that's something we need to take a look at then. And as far as how we're going to define what aggregate means.
You'll say it's clear now that you can't do that.
That you look at what's in 2, you look at what's in 3, and you look at what's in 4. That's the way it's currently drafted. Something else that caused confusion in myself as well is that you define in your zoning ordinance lot coverage to be building cover. So, for example, go back on page 12, in District Class 1, lot coverage is 85% maximum. That is building cover. Green area is 15%. So they can have, which they wouldn't, 85% building cover, but they have to have 15% green. They would not be able to have sidewalks, driveways, parking lots. So they really can't, even though it says 85% lot covered, that covers their buildings and their other impervious surfaces because of the fact that they have to have 15% green. So in 2, 3, and 4, we wanted to keep it consistent with what we were regulating. So we're regulating lot coverage. Here it's 50%, which is, again, building cover. They still have to have minimum green at 15. So they're basically allowed to have 50% covered with buildings, 35% covered with other impervious surfaces, and then 15 must remain green.
So why is Class 1 different then?
I mean, we could put it different in how it's, we just don't have.
It's supposed to be the same, should we just have it the same?
Well, it's not. We don't have a building cover. We technically.
We don't, but we can say the lot coverage is building coverage, but I would say lot coverage is 50% in Class 1. Green area is 15%, which allows you 35% of parking sidewalk.
Yeah, I don't know what, these came from years ago, and I think this was looking at what's there today. So I'd have to go back to Tim. These numbers came up with, I think.
Well, I think that's an open question.
Yeah, I feel that Mr. Babbitt's suggestion is 60 and 40% for the coverage, for the lot coverage, and 40% for the green area is not unreasonable.
It's not, Mr. Hellman, but that defeats the purpose. Again, one of the huge purposes of this ordinance is to say to the university, if you're going to expand, we're going to give you a confined area to expand upon. If we increase those green areas, they're getting no benefit. They're not able to expand within the confines of what you're calling the campus. And then they're going to have to look and say, well, we need to go outside of these districts.
Well, again, that would be the advantage of looking at it within the aggregate, because then they would be able to compensate for building in a densely area with green space in another. For example, they have a quad areas in the center of their campus.
That's in the borough.
I know. I'm just using that as an example. You know, they could have a quad type of arrangement in one of these areas that they would be building in one of the PUC class ones that would compensate for the green to allow them to get it. There's another purpose to this. I understand the university wants to have a buy-in here. We need to be able to give that to them, but also we have to be concerned about the interest of the residents as well.
And I think we have been. I mean, I think we've considered a lot of their comments and made changes. But these are policy decisions for you. I'm just sitting through years of meetings, literally years of meetings, with borough officials, university officials, trying to accomplish that goal. And where we started and where we ended up are two different places. So
I just wanted to follow up on Sean's question. If we were to say 50% lot coverage for buildings, 15% for green space, and then the rest of the 30-some% they'd have the option of using for parking or sidewalks or whatever, is that allowable? I mean, can we restrict the size of their lot coverage based on buildings, like their building size on the lot coverage? Or like, can we say 50% can only be used for building?
that's what you do in all other districts, yes. What the number is, I'm not saying 50% works. I would want to make sure that what they have today, we're not making it non-conforming.
Okay.
Because I don't know what, that's what I'm saying, these numbers came with an analysis of what they have on the lots today.
Someone's going to have to look at this new overlay and say, is it non-conforming when they look at the total aggregate for, because Norfolk County's got a lot of parking on it, right? So class 1 might still be okay with 50% building.
It might be, I just can't speak to that right now, yeah.
Okay.
Going back to the changes that we added on page 13 as a result of a conversation from the work session. So we added language in about, this is a new subparagraph 7. We carried over the perimeter setback for principal uses in districts 2, 3, and 4 shall be no less than a 30-foot minimum, except if it's contiguous to a residential use, then it has to be a 50-foot minimum with a 10 feet contiguous feet nearest the lot line planted and permanently maintained as a buffer yard. Notwithstanding the foregoing, front yard setback along West Rosedale should be a minimum of 20 feet. So that was added. Page 14.
Before you go there, Chris, I'm sorry. Just one thing that is inconsistent, potentially from a resident that abuts these districts perspective, is that class 1, we're talking about a maximum building height of 50 feet, and then we have the setbacks. Class 2, 3, and 4, we talk about a maximum building height of 60 feet. Now for the class 4, which is the industrial zone, probably not a big issue because it's not residential properties that are built class 4. For class 2, you have Junta Lane and some properties on High Street that do abut class 2 area. And so if I was a resident in one of those homes and said, why did you allow a 60-foot building to be my neighbor, but class 1 restricted to 50 feet, that is an inconsistency. And I'd like to find a way to either have the same or to allow a larger setback if we permit the 60 feet. So in other words, one choice would be to say, if you abut a property that's residential, the building height can only be 50 feet within 100 feet of that property line. Or that if you have a 60-foot building permitted, then the setback has to be, I'll make the number up, 75 feet. So I don't like, basically my problem is I don't like the inconsistency between a residential property owner in class 2 and a residential property owner in class 1 in terms of the building height that could be built next to that property.
In that regard, is some of that differential possibly due to the fact that there's a sort of a hill on the Junta Lane side, and that if you're building at Bailey or at the Wilmington Pike level, 50 foot would be the same as the upper level?
I mean, it might
follow what I'm saying?
I do, but if I look, I can know you can't do Google Maps, can you, right now?
The topography is such that
If you look at class 2, the parking garage that was built where class 2 is, I don't know how tall it is. But it could be that they say, well, actually, you don't move a parking garage, but you could put a university new building adjacent to Matlack Street and then build a parking garage behind it. It would now be basically the backyard view of Junta Lane residents. So See that surface parking lot facing Matlack Street there? That could become a new building, and then they could build a garage right up next to those property lines for Junta Lane. And
50 feet. It has to be 50 feet.
well, it's 60 feet right now. Up
No,
to
no, the 50-foot setback. It would have to be a 50-foot
50-foot
setback.
setback, but up to a 60-foot tall parking garage. Versus, they can't do that in Class 1. So I don't know the solution tonight, but I'm just pointing out I'd like to find one that is consistent. It could be either a bigger setback for a larger building height, or the same building height, the same setback.
Is that also possibly a calculation of shadow?
Yeah, it could be something like that. Unless we're worried about it in Class 4, so maybe we differentiate Class 2 from Class 4 in terms of building height.
You're saying 1, 2, and 3 would all be the same? And Class 4 we would...
Yeah, it could be 60 feet. Yeah, make Class 4 60 feet maximum
And the
building
others
height,
50.
the others would be 50 feet.
So do you want to give me specific direction on what to do, or do you want me to go back to Tim and get him to give ideas?
So kicking it around, what's the view of the board then?
I'm all for that. I agree with Sean. I think that consistency is great. And I'm looking out for our residents as well. I want to know, I guess I'd want to know why they came up with the difference before I would say that we should change it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just looking at the zoning and where,
Like if there's no topography issues, or if there's no I just don't understand why it was like that in the first place. If there's a real reason, I want to know.
As each class got bigger, from 1 to 4, it was to allow more development to occur. You're getting further away from residential areas and you're allowing more dense development. That was the thought.
Okay.
And higher buildings, and I don't know if Tim, quite honestly, looked at the existing heights of buildings in that district already. I don't know if he did an analysis of what's into today to say, well, we already have a building that's that height today. I'm not sure.
It could be that they are. It could be that one of the performing arts center or something else is 60 feet, but by going with this overlay, we now permit those to come close to the property lines. Because you can see the parking garage is pretty close to that property here that's on South High Street, but there's still a reasonable setback from that corner of the garage to the property itself, the building itself.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with me is that not being a planner,
Yeah,
not being a civil engineer, if I come up with a number, it's completely arbitrary and pulled out of thin air. So I would want to, have dialogue with somebody who can look at what's there today to make sure we're not creating nonconformities. And who could also say, well, what's typical in the industry if you have a building this tall as far as a setback? I mean, a lot of that depends on what you're looking at. So obviously, if the borough of Westchester, you're allowed to go to 60 or 75 feet and be 10 feet off the right of way. Here, you don't want that. But I also don't want you just to make up a number. I want you to put it in perspective to what's really on the ground. So I don't know if the university has do you have any knowledge about buildings today, your tallest building, and how far off the road it is, or how far off from the setback it is? No.
I mean, in the township, I couldn't give you a number. I mean, I think that the additional setbacks that were added for 2, 3, and 4 in the context of this ordinance are more than adequate. I think Tim would probably tell us that. I agree with you, Kristen. I mean, I don't have the expertise to weigh in on the specific numbers. That's more of a planner question, but certainly I can tell you from what I see in other districts that what's in this ordinance now is more than adequate, and the districts are different, so the fact that they might be disparate in some respects to the building height versus the setback, I don't think it's problematic. I understand, Sean, what you're saying. I see the logic of how you're trying to make it line up, but the districts do have differences as you kind of go down the line. I don't think they're problematic as laid out now, but I understand the question.
Do you see an issue of limiting the height of a building in the PUC2 to being 50 feet, or allow you to go to 60 feet if you increase the setback? Do you see that as being an issue?
No.
So then,
not as long as the increase. If you're talking about increase 10 feet in height, the setback should be another 50 feet. That would be ridiculous. We would lose so much land.
well, that's not what he was
I need
saying.
an expert to tell me what that should be.
Right.
The music building is 78 feet tall.
And how far do we think it's from?
Rick, can you scale out to that neighboring property either across
here?
across to the property line, or also to your left across the basin.
It's 260 feet.
So they don't have any tall buildings today in the West Goshen that abut residential. Is that, you think that's a fair statement?
I think that's a West Goshen, isn't that a WCU owned property, that first building? It's the Poetry Center or something, the poetry? Yeah, I don't think that's a residence, I think that might be the poetry building or something.
It is.
Yeah, it's not a residence.
Hey, Rick, pull back to the parking deck, if you would. No, the other way, down. Keep going. There's a property, keep going, up. Sorry. No, the other way, that's not up. Back, sorry. Back towards up.
Up is a relative.
That way. That way. On the screen. No, the other way.
Northeast, west, south.
Southwest.
Southwest. All right.
Southwest. The corner. Okay. Focus in on the parking deck, not the building.
Parking deck's right here.
Focus, have that as the center, because there's a residential property to the rear.
Parking?
To the south.
Yeah.
To the other place.
There you go. Okay. No, there is a building to the
That's
left.
university.
No. There is a building to the left off the map that is a private residence, to my knowledge.
On the other side of that
Yeah.
field.
I believe that is a private residence.
Here?
Yeah, so go from the corner of the building
But
to
it
that.
would be better from the lot line, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So go to from the corner of the building to the trees, just as a generality. No, to the trees. Sorry, Rick. There you go.
116 feet.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we put it at that if you abut in the PUC2, if you abut a residential, you can stay at 50 feet and have to have a 50-foot setback. If you want to go to 60 feet, you have to increase to 75, and we'll talk to Tim and see if he thinks that's
I need a
reasonable.
recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Plan it to what that's-
What that is, right. But I understand the concept.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on page 14, this was just a clarification in C that the university main campus plan has to contain all of the following components, and then we list them. One question was raised as to why paragraph 7 was deleted, sanitary sewer and public water impact analysis. This master plan is approved through a conditional use process. You're still required to comply with conditional use standards in 84-75 of the ordinance, and that section requires the applicant to demonstrate feasibility of public water and public sewer. We figured that comes in as part of your conditional use application. Besides, as identifying that with the will serve letter, which you typically see in a conditional use application, and documenting that the authority has sufficient capacity to service the uses. We think that's coming in anyway. Don't know what else you're going to put into your report other than demonstrating you have done that analysis and research and have letters from both the authority and the water provider.
So that analysis of the conditional use area will have been done on the whole of the master plan, not on class 1 or class 2, or
Right.
the whole
Yeah.
assessment of this plan would increase sewer flows by X.
Yeah.
But before you leave that, on the 137B, the final line, there's such plan, the master university main campus plan shall be reviewed by the planning commission in accordance with the criteria and procedures in this article. 27, if we can include, and then the planning commission looked at this back in July and wanted to add a line to that, and reviewed and decided by the board of supervisors in accordance with this article. So if we can include that also, just to identify very clearly what the procedure is.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason why I didn't do that, John, the first time I saw that is that's the only body that can approve a conditional use is the board of supervisors. That's the only body that has the authority to render approval and hold a hearing on a conditional use. So it goes without saying, I guess, but I don't have a problem adding it.
Okay.
So you wanted to say, just so I'm clear, before paragraph C, we're now, is that, there's a period there, we'd say, and reviewed and decided by the board of supervisors?
That's correct.
Okay. On, some of my numbering was off, and then I really got confused because I took out overlay and I put it back in, and I'm not so great at Word. Page 18, I clarified this section was a little confusing to me, and I just made some language. Notwithstanding the parking required for development proposed on the university's master plan, independent, non-university third-party land development. So if, for example, a user who's not the university, who happens to be in the PUC, puts a land development together, they have to go back to the general parking standards in 8455I of the zoning ordinance. That's what that section is supposed to say. On page 20 was another...
Kristen, on page 18, the stormwater management strategy. So it says here to extend the township standards deviate from terms of the university's MS4 permit issued by DEP. So we've got an MS4 permit now. Shouldn't we have at least a mutuality there that it has to meet any requirement of our MS4 permit for these areas?
Well, I called Rick today to talk to him about that. I don't think the law allows us today to impose upon a developer do something that complies with our township permit. So right now, we don't have the authority in our ordinances to shift the responsibility, for example, of the PRP plan or the TMDL plan to a private developer. If we do it, number one, we have to make sure the law allows us, which right now I don't think that's the state of the law. And two, we have to do it township-wide. We have to have it within our stormwater ordinances that we can shift that responsibility to developers as they come in. The MS4 permit for the township is specific to what the township's obligations are to reduce the pollutant load, address impaired streams, and maintain your own stormwater systems. To me, it's not something that you do shift that responsibility to a private developer. And that's actually one of the litigation issues that we're dealing with the university and the borough right now, because the borough has a stream protection ordinance, the university has challenged it, and they're saying, hey, we have our own MS4 permit we have to deal with. Borough, you deal with yours, we'll deal with ours. So that issue is really being sort of litigated right now. That's not the specific issue.
Just to be clear, the Commonwealth has challenged it.
Commonwealth.
And the university maintains its own MS4 permit, just so you're aware.
Yeah, so Sean, that's why I didn't.
So we don't have any stormwater, we don't have anything in an ordinance, in a stormwater ordinance, to hold a builder or developer to a certain stormwater standard?
No, you do. You have a very stringent stormwater ordinance. It's referred to as the Act 167 ordinance. You were required by DEP in the county to adopt it. You didn't have any discretion except for determining what the minimum threshold was before you had to implement stormwater management. But as far as that ordinance, now also, that's on private land as it gets developed, what stormwater controls they have to implement, and whether it's infiltration or, it deals with water volume and water quality. But our MS4 permit is dealing with our storm sewer system, the township-owned, municipal-owned storm sewer, and as it goes into the streams, what the quality of the water is as it enters those streams. So in effect, by implementing stormwater controls in accordance with your stormwater ordinance, you are you're helping get to your MS4 permit requirements, but it's not as specific to say, university, if you do a master plan and you're going to have stormwater management, you have to make sure the water coming into our pipes only has a certain level of whatever the phosphorus, chlorine, whatever it is. They can't do that. We're not there yet in the law.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And Rick is much better at describing this than I am, so I'm trying my best here. Back to page 20. The comments or the additions I made here were again to clarify comments that we had at the work session, that we want to make sure that once the master plan is approved, they have the ability to go through land development for something that's on that master plan. If there's a use or a building that was not approved on a master plan, they have to go back and revise the master plan to accommodate that use or that building. There has been a lot of discussion about, and Mr. Babbitt raised issues about other triggers that would require them to go back through the master plan process. And we had that conversation with the university during the process. Really what we came down to was what we thought was the most significant trigger would be if the enrollment projections went beyond 5% beyond what they said it was. So they now decide they're going to allow 26,000 students in, where currently they have, I'm making up the number, 18,005 or something. That's obviously a significant change that could implicate changes in the master plan. Mr. Walsh raised a really good question about where will we get that information about the enrollment projections, and we will require that. We can put it into this ordinance if you want, but my thought process was after the master plan is approved, as the university goes to develop a building through land development that's shown on the master plan, we could make sure that the enrollment projections that they provided are still valid. And if not, we'd say, sorry, your zoning approval that you have to go through this building for land development is no longer valid because the projections have increased. So that would be, we have to remind ourselves to do that, so it may not be a bad idea to put a sentence in to cover that. Another discussion point, and I know Mr. Hellman shared the same concern, and it was raised by Mr. Babbitt as well, and it's obviously open for policy discussion, is once the master plan is approved, this ordinance says that that master plan is valid from a zoning perspective, only from a zoning perspective for a period of 10 years. Some of the projections and the studies that have to be submitted by the university only require them to go 3 years out, and so there was thought that that was an inconsistency. When I first drafted this, I know I put in 10 years for everything, and we got pushed back, we got to 5, and then the university came and said, look, we let them speak for themselves, but they basically said the numbers we're going to give you, if you make us go 5 and 10 years out, isn't going to be reliable data. We can give you reliable data going 3 years out. My perspective and why I don't have a concern about a 10-year vesting is that I am familiar with how long it takes the process to come, how much money and time is spent on everybody's part to get to a zoning approval. Once you get the zoning approval, you still have to go through a land development process. You still have to get outside agency permits from DEP, from HOPs, from PennDOT. That process, I don't think ever takes less than a year. I mean, West Goshen is one of the quickest places, actually, and I think, Denny Howe's office is here. 2 engineers will tell you West Goshen is one of the quicker places, but it doesn't ever probably take less than a year. So if you think about the master plan, the land development process could take 1 year to 18 months. You're now into that zoning approval. And Mr. Walsh's comment was, okay, look at what's happened around West Goshen. Look at how Exton has been developed. There have been significant changes in and around our community where new boards may want to come in and rethink approvals that have been granted. I fully understand that. But for the university, who's here now today and who isn't going anywhere, it's not like, when I think about the Greystone project, and I think about that project having vested, right, under zoning. First of all, the MPC says that when you file your conditional use, as long as you get your conditional use approval and then proceed to land development, you're vested under the ordinances. So the MPC has this vesting concept built into it. When a land development plan is approved, you're vested for a period of 5 years to substantially complete that plan. My thought process was that this master plan is more complex, requires more projection and planning, that we wanted to give them vesting beyond the 5 years. They're already given those under the MPC. What's the value? What can we offer to them to incentivize them to really do good, meaningful planning and give you the tools to have a plan that everybody can rely upon for a period of 10 years? That was where my thought process was.
But the university already said that they won't be able to provide the data if it's 10 years out. So I just feel that having a 10-year plan, I just feel like it's, I don't know, I mean, we can talk about this. I just feel like it's worth revisiting after 5 years.
I can see both sides of the argument. I mean, we do have a clause in here that says, hey, you can always come and get this period extended at the approval of the board, so you don't have to redo a master plan for 5 years. You could ask the board at that time to extend the period. And if things have not changed in the surrounding townships, or there's not a lot of development within the township that's impacting traffic or other things in this area, then I would expect that board at that time to say, yeah, it seems reasonable, carry on with your master plan development. As an example, in doing the master plan, under the traffic study, it specifically says existing transportation conditions, highway links and intersections serving the PUC must be described and existing level of use analyzed. So it's talking about traffic that's moving through and into this area anyway. In 10 years' time, if West Town has done something radical, we have a lot of traffic coming in and out because of more development. And I just don't like the idea of grandfathering something for 10 years when the world changes. And I I think that the option is there to say 5 years is reasonable. I completely understand the development timeline, securing funds for the university to build things, acquiring the property to do it, takes time. But again, if things have not really changed, I don't see why a board wouldn't continue to allow to extend that period to allow the master plan to be executed over 6, 7, 8 years, whatever is needed in the end. So I think it's reasonable to protect the township itself to say, the plan, the vesting is only 5 years, maybe 6 at the max. And the 10 years to me seems too long, given the fact that many things can change over that length of time.
Well, I have to weigh in on that, because when the university agreed to provide the information that's in this ordinance, that 10 years was a critical piece of the university saying, okay, we'll provide this information. All of the information that you see in this ordinance, none of it is required to be provided by the university.
I understand, Brian, but Chris just said when it first started off, the ask of you was for a 10-year plan, and you said we can't give you that information, we can't plan that far out, we're only going to give you 5 years. In fact, for enrollment, it's only 3 years. So from a township perspective, we can't plan what's going to happen in this township or surrounding townships for 10 years. We need the ability to be able to control and understand it as time goes by. So the argument applies both ways to me.
But that's not an accurate statement of how it went, actually.
Well, how did it go?
What happened was we were asked to provide this information, and we assessed that. And some of that information is stuff that the university didn't already maintain. So we had to go back and look at carefully what can we really provide, what can we really come up with and submit with an application that would be submitted under this new ordinance. So we did that very carefully. The comment that you made about the 10 years, a lot of the information that will be provided is projected over 10 years. It's only, if you look through the different sections, it's only certain information that we can't predict out further than 3 years. And so to accommodate that issue, that enrollment trigger was put into the ordinance because we were all trying to plan with what we could realistically provide and follow and adhere to. And so when we came back to the township and said, look, 3 years is all we can predict on enrollment, housing, with any accuracy whatsoever, that's when the planning on the township side, frankly, the planner and your solicitor said, okay, well, if that's the case, out of some meetings that you guys had internally, if that's the case, then we'll need a protection so that if the enrollment changes, you'll have to go back in. So that was put in for that reason. But the whole basis of the university agreeing to provide all that data that's listed in the ordinance was to get that 10-year vested approval, because I know you're saying you understand the development process, but I doubt that you can conceptualize the cost, expense, the time, and manpower that would go into providing all the information that's set forth in this ordinance. And the land development proposals on the master plan would be defined on the plan and set for a 10-year period. We think that's very reasonable. We think that's the basis for, I know for a fact that's the basis for the university agreeing to provide that information. And I would ask that that provision be left in the ordinance. It's really a critical piece of what we've collaborated and cooperated in with the township in this draft that you have. Very critical.
I think maybe the way I'd like to talk to the university president, have a conversation as a group on that before, accept it as that's needed.
Understood. So that was the bulk of the changes I made. I don't know, Mr. Walsh or Mr. Hellman, if you had any other comments on if I was able to answer the questions you raised today, if you had any other concerns, or if any members of the board had any other concerns.
I think all the questions I raised, you are going to get some maps, right, that are going to be clearly
Yeah, we have them.
Delineated all 4 districts
Derek
at
has
large, and each district would be separate, map for each district.
I don't have the capability to print
I know,
them to
but
the
I'm
lab.
saying it's part of the ordinance.
Yes, absolutely, they will be attached.
This way everybody can see exactly what these ordinances are.
Yep.
So I do feel we're making progress. I mean, I know we've had a healthy discussion this evening, but I think overall, Kristen, I hope you agree with the last outstanding issues in the work.
Sure.
Well, yeah, I think we've done moved a lot of movement here, and there's been a lot of work done from all parties concerned, and I think it's been very helpful for both the township, the residents, and as well as for the university.
I don't know if you could spend, I know there's a little bit of homework, so to speak, what we could do with Tim and Bernard, and if maybe, I know for the March work session, you wanted to have the TNB, maybe I could spend 10 minutes at the beginning just to sort of recap the topics that I went back and talked to Tim about. If that was helpful, then maybe just move forward. Does that work?
I think that would be helpful, yeah.
Okay.
So are there any residents who'd like to comment?
I have a question, 2 questions.
You're welcome, thank you.
And I can provide this to David, I'm sorry, I did not, because I knew there were discussion points, I didn't want him to think we were stuck on what was sent as being the final draft. I knew there was going to be further discussion because of the comments I've received, but I will provide to him this.
Okay, I have 2 questions. This is on? On and off. We were talking about making a potential R3 change where you would exclude university uses. Maybe allow educational uses like a daycare or something, or a small school, Goddard, like you mentioned earlier, but excluding university uses. You're looking puzzled. Did I mishear?
No.
No, yes, okay, right.
That's the way this is drafted now.
Right, so would this be on a parallel track to doing the overlay? Because I imagine this is separate. It's
in here now. It's in here now, sir. So we redefined educational use to not allow university uses. The current ordinance today allows in the R3 district by conditional use educational uses. So all we have to do is redefine educational use the way it's defined in this draft to exclude university uses.
And this now it's a separate. It becomes a separate. Separate from the overlay, because the overlay is going to, like you say, you're debating time frame, whatever else, but this becomes something in parallel that is a change to the zoning ordinance.
I don't know what you mean by separate to the overlay. The overlay is accomplished through an amendment to the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
So the change in definition for educational use would only really happen as part of this ordinance being adopted.
Okay. But now it becomes part of the I might not have the terminology right, it becomes part of the township code, right?
Zoning ordinance, yes, that's correct.
Right, so now hypothetically, let's say university buys a piece of property and they seek variances. I mean, there is now this, assume this updated code, change code. If they seek variances to do, essentially build another building, let's say, they could go to the zoning hearing board, right, seek variances still?
Any property owner will have that ability.
Right. So would this, the way this would be written, would it give it a greater protection? Would it make it much harder to do this at the zoning hearing board, or?
I would think so. The board and the township staff would oppose their application in front of the ZHB, of the solicitor, because it would be in violation of our ordinance.
First of all, the university wouldn't be able to prove the burden to even accomplish the variance.
Exactly.
There's a high standard to obtain a use variance.
Okay.
So they wouldn't be able to accomplish that standard, and I think Mr. Nagel would probably agree with me on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from the residents?
Yes, my name is Daniel Miller. I'm a resident of West Goshen and also a member of the West Goshen, known as the Neighborhood Preservation Organization. And I was asked tonight to read a letter of someone that couldn't be here this evening. His name is Reverend Daniel Schatz. So my name is Daniel, and I'd like to read a letter from Daniel.
Can you stand behind the microphone now so we can all hear?
Yeah.
Thank you.
There we go. I'd like to read a letter. Now, I timed it, his letter, and it's 3 minutes and 20 seconds.
We're going to let you have 3 minutes and 20
Okay,
seconds.
good. That way we don't have to popcorn read out. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Set the time.
The letter goes like this. Dear members of the Board of Supervisors, you folks, because I am unable to be with you in person this evening, I'm writing to urge you to please continue to prioritize the needs of residents as plans for the PUC Class 1 district move forward. And in particular, to include provisions for a buffer of green space between major development and local residences. At our meeting 2 weeks ago, Ms. Kristen Camp began the proceedings by cautioning that the township might not be able to accept recommendations for setbacks and other improvements to the ordinance. Mr. Brian Nagel, representing the university, made a comment about how much the university had already given to this negotiation. Both of these comments bothered me, but it took thinking them over before I fully realized why. Ms. Camp talked about a long series of negotiations. At no time, though, have residents been included in these negotiations, and we remained uninformed about the PUC overlay until it was almost too late. Had we been consulted earlier in the process, well, negotiations might have happened differently. Mr. Nagel spoke of the university being asked to give more and more. I see it differently. We are not asking the university to give anything. We are simply asking that they take marginally less. We understand that university development happens. We ask that it happen in a way which respects the surrounding neighborhoods. It is the residents who are required to give when major development takes place adjacent to our homes. Our quality of life deteriorates when noise and traffic from campus increases, and our children's safety is placed at risk by university students who ignore traffic signs and university police who fail to enforce them. Parking near our own homes becomes increasingly difficult. We have seen houses in our neighborhoods acquired by the university left to degrade for years. We think a comprehensive plan is a good idea, and by and large, we support the ordinance. We simply ask for some basic protections and setbacks so that the suburban, small-town character of our neighborhoods does not become spoiled by major urban development on our doorstep. And our beautiful historic neighborhood is not overwhelmed. In closing, moderate green space and setback requirements are not too much to ask, especially coming from a neighborhood which has given so much over so many years. Thank you for your time and your continued attention. Sincerely, Reverend Daniel Schatz. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so where are we?
I think I have some good talking points to go back to Tim and get some additional information and insight from, and also have discussion with the university and report back to you at your work session. And I will just comment to one thing, two things. One is that the residents' input has not been brought in too late. We haven't even had a hearing process yet. We're still in the molding of the ordinance stage. We had to have something to present to the board before we could bring it to the neighbors. So zoning ordinances cannot be done without a public hearing process. We had this started as a collaborative effort between the Borough of Westchester, West Goshen, and the university. Once a draft was brought, the neighbors were brought into it. So it's not too late. Obviously, your concerns have been heard and they're still being tweaked. So I just want to make sure people understood that this wasn't like somebody was trying to pass something without public input and public involvement. I think he misunderstood the comments I made at the very beginning, at the outset of the last meeting. All I was trying to say is that each side, each party has to give a little bit. A master plan is not something that's really contemplated under the MPC. So it's sort of, it is a novel concept. And to get a meaningful master plan that has the components that this ordinance calls for, we needed consensus and cooperation. And that's where there was a give and take. We started this effort by even just looking at the legal authority for a zoning requirement to have a master planning process. And it really doesn't really speak to that in the MPC. So again, that's where you needed university buy-in to say, yeah, we'll go along with this. We want to do long-range planning with you, township and borough, and we will provide these reports and we'll put money and time into preparing these reports. But in exchange, we want to know that then we have something we can rely upon for an extended period of time. So that's sort of where we ended up. But thank you very much for those comments.
So at this point then, you're going to do another revision, correct? And then the planning commission will have a chance to take a look-see at it?
Yeah, I think I want to come back to you guys to make sure you're comfortable with it before we go through that full process.
Listen, I'd like to chime in and just also remind everybody that there was a joint board and planning commission public meeting held in this building over a year ago. So this has been out there, duly publicized with the opportunity. And neighbors did come and participate, in fact, at that meeting. It was so largely attended that this meeting room was opened up to the floor size and it has the capability to accommodate for everyone who attended that meeting. So it has been largely publicized and discussed, including with the neighbors, for a long period of time.
Okay, so the next step is yours.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for everybody's input.
Thank you. Item number 14.
Okay,
Do you
so
lead on that one too?
yes,
Okay.
thank you. 704 East Market Street Associates LP filed a conditional use application. The board held a hearing on January 21st, 2020. The applicant seeks to build a 2,635 square foot bank, which will be leased to Trumark Financial Credit Union on property located at 700 East Market Street and 11 South Balmer Street. As I typically do, prepared a draft conditional use decision and order for the board to consider tonight. The order proposes that the board would approve the conditional use subject to 7 conditions that are stated in the order. And they would be that the bank must be developed in substantial conformity with the evidence and testimony presented by the applicant, including the plans that were presented, as well as the sidewalk exhibit plan. The applicant has to investigate if the roof structure of the bank can support solar panels, if the proposed architectural design of the building can be designed to support installation of solar panels, applicant shall design the roof structure to accommodate such installation. The third proposed condition is that applicant has to investigate if the plan can be revised to provide two-way access from South Balmer Street. And if it can be designed to provide that two-way access and still meet all applicable zoning requirements, then they must revise the plan in such way. The fourth condition is they have to comply with the conditions imposed by the Zoning Hearing Board in its decision and order of January 9th, 2020. The fifth is that they indicated that their stormwater would be going into existing storm pipes in South Balmer Street. They need to make sure that those pipes are adequate to handle the capacity of the flows that will be going. And if not, they have to make the necessary improvements. These conditions in this order would be bound, their successors and assigns. Anybody that would build this bank, whether it be the applicant in Trumark or any other bank, they would be subject to these conditions as well. That runs with the property. And then we always ask the applicant to accept the conditions in writing. So those would be the proposed conditions of approval. If anybody has any questions on the draft decision, I'm happy to answer it. I typically circulate a draft to applicant's counsel to make sure they don't have any issues or concerns, and if they do, I'd like to try to bring those to the board. Mr. Colagrefo indicated that the applicant would accept these conditions. The engineers who presented the testimony are here if there's any questions on that as well.
Any questions from the board? Any public comments? Yes, Dr. Wright, come on up.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Doug White, Goshen. In the condition of use, was there a provision for the pedestrian safety in front of the building at all, in terms of affixing the concrete bunkers to the ground, or having an 8-inch curb if they're not going to put bollards?
I know there was discussion about it at the hearing, but I don't think, Rick, I did not think you supported bollards.
The planning commission did not support bollards.
But as far as the height of the curb, is that a detail that we worked out during land development?
Yes. And the parking blocks are required to be secured anyway, so that's not optional.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wright.
Any other public comment on this matter? Hearing none. We're going to make a motion and a second.
I'll make a motion to approve the conditional use application for its block being subject to the conditions.
I'll second.
Okay, now, any public comment? Now that we have a motion and a second. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Guys, I'll get you a copy tomorrow. Signed copy. Thanks.
Okay, item 19, item 15, Sustainability Advisory Committee discussion.
After Ms. Camp had forwarded some information from the borough, I just threw together just a draft sustainability committee ordinance, just to start the conversation. So it's completely up to the board what you want to do with regulations, duties, responsibilities.
I'm passing out something. I did not realize there was a statute, Pennsylvania statute, that I thought it was in the second class code. This establishes the right of municipal bodies such as yours to create the EAC. So again, doesn't say much, but I was thinking it was going to be in the second class code.
Are EAC and SAC interchangeable?
It depends on what you want it to be. I mean,
okay.
This specifically talks about an EAC and powers. If you wanted to call that committee your sustainability committee, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, Casey, I didn't know until literally like 4 minutes before I left.
So is that short enough to read, or maybe it's not just 2 pages? Yeah. Yeah.
She's got copies. You're welcome.
So again, it's within the confines of the code. We can come up with a further draft and see what the board's interested in for duties, responsibilities, membership, everything.
So you adopted this from the borough?
Well, the Borough Sustainability Committee is not a true EAC the way this statute contemplates. I think
In what way, really?
I think it's a little bit different. I mean,
And the borough is a home rule community, so
That's right.
They can
They're not
essentially do whatever they want to a degree. So we're under strict.
So you drafted this, where did you get this verbiage from?
Directly from the boroughs.
Oh, just from the borough?
Sure.
But they're a different kind of, yeah, okay.
Here are, I was going to scan all these to you, and I thought, you know what, I'll let the discussion go on. These are examples of other second-class townships in Chester County that have created specifically environmental advisory councils.
Right.
A lot of them don't say much. They really just mirror the statute. So as far as the duties, I think you can go beyond. If you want to give them and delegate to them additional duties, you can.
So I prepared just a little bit, just to inform people out there who might not understand or ever heard of sustainability. Just really quick, I'm just going to run through what I have here. So the United Nations defines sustainability or sustainable development really as that it meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs, which is why I personally feel that an SAC, a sustainability committee, would be a little bit more useful than an environmental advisory committee, because if you look at sustainability as a whole, there's 3 pillars. There's economic development, there's social development, and there's environmental protection. So you're looking at it more of from a long-term perspective, dealing with many different facets of government. So the pillars are not mutually exclusive, but none of them can exist really without the others succeeding, which is also known as the triple bottom line in sustainability jargon. But really, as far as the mission or the objective of the committee, it would really address things like purchasing, transportation, really many facets of government, building, groundskeeping, public engagement and education, waste, water, affordable housing and diversity, investment finance, building maintenance, land management, really all that kind of stuff. And by establishing the committee in West Goshen, it can promote new development that's sustainable through land use regulations and building codes, perhaps. I mean, that could be a goal eventually, right? This is the beginning stages, but we're thinking sort of long-term. By conserving, look, we have all these traffic issues happening right now. By conserving land and kind of making a more compact society, it's reducing the need for personal automobile travel. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear what the rest of the board has to say as far as the wording, sustainability advisory committee versus environmental advisory committee.
I think the idea that we have an EAC as a structure for you to work from, it sounds like we can call it whatever we want to call it.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to add to it is that in addition to your own expertise, the process of putting this group together will need some opportunity for us to ask people to provide resumes if they would like to join. Because I think part of their initial, for all the new committees we're starting, we want to make sure that the group can come together and make their own decisions about what this will look like and how it might be staged over the course of the first year and then into the second year.
Right, they're going to operate themselves. Really, the board would just kind of.
Right, but creating that structure for your advisory group would be the beginning starting point.
Yeah, sure.
And I think that the comprehensive plan already addresses these issues, not specifically in terms of the outcomes, but certainly the investment that we wanted to make in, the bike trails, walking paths, all those types of things that were part of that. So hopefully that can be part of what you talk about and you bring to the table in terms of how we make this.
So Robin, am I understanding you that you're saying that get volunteers now to help develop and form what the sustainability committee will do and what their mission will do, or you still want the board to be the one that determines that without?
I think I would defer to the experts who have that skill set and knowledge to help us decide what it should look like.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, we need a dialogue between people who have the passion and interest to help us with this space, and where the board has its interests and focus and priorities, and kind of find the right balance around what the priorities should be. I mean, I think the basic draft here is kind of a good place to start. I mean, I don't see we need to define much more than that, but then beyond that, if we get into what you're really going to work on and how's that look once people form the committee itself. So I had one question for you, Casey. I mean, you mentioned whether we need to do an ordinance to do this, to establish it, or whether it could be by resolution.
Well, I'll defer to Kristen because with this, I'm not sure. With this information tonight, I'm not sure.
I've only ever seen it by an ordinance, excuse me.
Okay.
But
so similar to establishing a historical commission,
yeah,
or something like that.
But I don't. To me, I think it depends on how. Not that an ordinance can't be revised, but I think there's more of a finality or a permanency to the creation of the entity if you do it through an ordinance.
Yeah, it's not just some ad hoc committee. I mean, even the
But it doesn't have to be that way.
Right, exactly. I mean, we established it, and then it went away because we got the job done.
It's still by resolution.
No, it's just we didn't even have to do that because it's just a temporary task force. Exactly.
Got it.
One thing I wanted to ask in the beginning, the COG study by Cadmus, does that fit in with this
It does, but it's got
Yes.
its own life and initiative,
Okay.
and, you know, there's two elements to it. Some of the output recommendations are going to have to be driven by the municipality. So you heard some of them tonight around, well, how do you plan for the long-term future around electric vehicles as part of municipal government? And that might be one. Then there's another element to which is more multiple municipality effort, which is how do we access utility scale pricing for renewable energy, which is cheaper than what we're paying now. That's a different approach. But what we don't want to do is obviously form a sustainability committee that the first job we want to do is look at the same things that we're already
Well,
doing.
and that's what I was thinking. It seems like one of the tasks that the Sustainability Committee would do would be how does West Goshen implement that plan?
Yeah,
As far as-
Absolutely. Well, actually, right, I look at it almost as getting a return on our own investment for signing up for that Kevin study, right? I mean, we have to have dedicated, experts
Make it their
really
priority.
to have a working group that can do that.
So is the next step then to advertise for people to be involved in this, so we'll call it sort of a task force to create it, to create this committee?
Task force to create the committee?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll post that on the website, seeking resumes of, I won't even say qualified, we'll take whatever they come, we'll decide.
So we're seeking, I guess, between 5 and 7 members, minimum 5, maximum 7.
Right.
Yeah, so if you want to weigh in on what the request might look like, that would be helpful.
Yeah, so, well, I know that the borough gives others outside of the borough the opportunity to, like, there's a maximum of 2 that can sit on.
Yeah, I
I'm not
think-
sure that we need to do that necessarily.
24,000 residents, I would hope we would have enough.
Yeah,
experts
like
within our-
obviously you need to be a
within our
resident of the
boundaries.
township. But as far as, what the resume looks like or their background, I mean, we're seeking all backgrounds, I think, right? All like areas of expertise.
Yeah, environmental,
But mainly,
sustainability.
planning, engineering, chemistry, many different backgrounds, really, so.
Okay, so next item, we're on to number 16, Resolution 5, 2020.
Do we have to vote on anything for the ordinance?
No,
I don't think so.
I just got general
Just
directions.
a starting point, yeah. So documents instruction from the finance department, which is an
Yeah.
annual.
Yeah, it's our typical finance department records destruction request. Everything from 2012 miscellaneous cash receipts ledger to 2017 utility billing payment proofs. It gets rid of boxes of material that we don't need to keep for the Museum and Historical Commission retention guidelines. So we follow what's in the letter.
Make a motion to approve
Do we have a second?
I'll second. Go ahead.
Yes, public comment.
Hi, thank you. Do we have the space to retain those for a few more years?
No.
I'm just curious, we spent $60,000 on filing cabinets. I believe it was either in last year's budget or the year before. Are those filing cabinets full?
They're not full, but we don't have the space to maintain all of these old records that are not required to be kept. And we didn't add any more space really with the filing system. We replaced what was there because of the limits of the building. We're following the state guidelines to the letter. So
Well, those are the guidelines. I think sometimes we should just go above and beyond what the guidelines are. And again, I know I have to be very careful with my wording, but there's a situation in Kennett, and they're having problems because records were destroyed and they can only go back 7 or 10 years. And it's been stated that they're limited. They can't stop because unfortunately they reduced, they threw away financial records. And if we have the space, if we paid $60,000 for filing cabinets and there's still room and we have big facilities, warehouses, I think we should say 10 years. Let's do better than what the bare minimum, what the law says. Let's go above and beyond. Thank you.
Any other public comment? Hearing none. Hearing none, motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the next item is Resolution 6-2020, Chester County Tax Collection Committee Appointments. Mr. LeBlanc.
I would make a comment there.
Okay.
This is the group that appoints the local tax collector, for example, either part-timer or Keystone.
Mr. Hughes, I can't hear you, sir. Can you use that microphone, please? Thank you.
You're welcome. I would ask that I be appointed to that, having experienced the problems that are created by Keystone, for example. This group picks whether it's Keystone or Berkheimer or whoever. There are, I think, about 5 approved now in the state. Sometimes they look at, in the past, at who could be the cheapest as far as the collection goes, and didn't realize, I think, the people that were on these committees, and not just us, but obviously throughout the county, didn't realize the burden of the information that was required, that was being placed on local businesses. In fact, a lot of mom and pop type stores. It was very onerous in some cases. For example, Berkheimer would pre-populate their forms. If you had 4 employees last month, or the last quarter, this next quarter, that is 4 people would be listed on the form that they sent. Berkheimer was therefore easier to deal with, and had, I think, from what I've observed, better compliance and a faster turnaround in a lot of cases for the money coming back to the townships. Keystone did not do that. But those kind of facts, I don't think were considered. They were considered only from the standpoint of the local municipalities. And hence they chose Keystone. My comment is that I would like to have my 2 cents worth on the committee. And it only comes up over, 5 years?
We're next due for a bid in 2 years.
Yeah. So
it has to be bid out. It's not an RFP process.
It is a selection situation that they can override if they want.
My recollection was you
can take the best or the second best bid.
I'm not sure. We'd have to research that. There was $1 million difference between Berkheimer and Keystone. So the municipality said absolutely no to Berkheimer at the time. Per year difference.
Did you say it wasn't an RFP though?
It's a bid required by the law.
Kind of bid include kind of requirements or questions around the issues that you just described?
And I don't think that they took into consideration those onerous problems that they created for the small guy.
So they didn't know what we're getting into.
Basically, yeah, it was the first time around, and it's understandable.
Yeah.
So do we need to make a motion to have him appointed? Is there anyone else on the board here interested in that position? Okay, thank you, Mr. Purnell, for stepping up.
Me and the finance director. Me and the finance director.
I'm sorry, okay, so what's that?
Typically, we have 1 board member, myself, and the finance director as alternates. Correct.
So he would be the primary voting delegate?
Correct.
And Christine would be the second?
Sure, interchangeable for the last 2.
I would ask to be the third or the second one.
You don't want to be the primary voting delegate?
I'll take it if you give it to me.
Yeah, he wants to give it to you. How much to work?
Exactly.
That's not a problem. Glad to go.
Okay, so we have a motion and we need a second? Yes?
No, somebody needs to make a motion.
You need to.
That's what I'm saying, we need a motion.
I'll
and
make a
second.
motion.
Ashley?
Thank you.
You need to specify who.
Yeah, so the motion is for Hugh to be the primary voting delegate.
Correct.
And Casey be the first alternate, and Chris to be the second. Okay, I'll make that as a motion if I can.
Well, Ashley's trying to do it.
I'll second it.
She made the motion, we need a second now.
I will second it.
Okay, we now have a second. Okay, any public comment? Yes, Margie, come on up.
Hi, thank you. Would you be so kind as to just describe exactly what this committee is, how often it meets? It was actually news to me. I stumbled across Chester County Tax Collection Committee just a couple of weeks ago. I'd never heard of it. I was quite surprised I had never heard of it, and then learned that Mr. Lalonde has in fact is chairman and has been maybe a couple of years. So,
No, just one.
okay, but I don't know what that is, and it might be helpful to new board members and the audience as to what that committee is. And
Sure.
how often you meet, and who else meets? Is it all 57 municipalities in the county, or what? Thank you.
I think it was back in 2009, the state legislature took away the ability for local governments to choose our own tax collector. There was no bid process, RFP process, nothing. There was also, at the time, a little worry that the state was going to take it away entirely and have those receipts go through the state, which would mean the state would start taking a couple % off for their, but they did keep it at the county level. So Chester County adopted early. I think the requirement was by 2010, 2011. All the counties had to have a county earned income tax collection committee set up. Now, all municipalities don't collect earned income. It also oversees the collection of the LST, the local services tax. But again, all municipalities in Chester County don't have it. I don't know how many members we have, maybe 50, I don't remember the exact numbers. It's made up of an executive committee, which is voted on once a year at the annual meeting, which is held in November of each year. I was made, Doug Hanley from Euclid was the chairman from 2009. He took it through the whole, he just retired, so it was put to a vote of the municipalities to have me take over. So I've been it since November, and then just re-upped last November, so I'm in my second year, I guess. We meet typically quarterly. There's an appeals committee if Mr. Webb, as a county resident, Mr. Craig, as a county resident, has a problem with their earned income tax invoice or return, they appeal it with Keystone and with our committee. That's the way the state law is about. This is all strictly by state law. There's no wiggle room with how we do things. Everything's prescribed by the state. So again, we meet about quarterly. A little more often if we need to. We meet more often leading up to the November annual meeting, which every single municipality is invited to come out and vote on the agenda. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you for
Thank you.
standing up. Okay, Faulkner Inspection Services, third-party electrical inspectors.
Yeah, this is just another housekeeping item. The township is required to approve third-party electrical inspectors. We do not do electrical inspections for residential commercial. So we have a list in our land development, our building permit package of electrical inspectors. And Faulkner has applied to us to become probably our 13th or so, 14th inspector. Homeowners, corporations can pick at their discretion someone from the list. So we have no skin in the game except for the board can approve who is on that list, that's all. They applied to us directly because one of our residents was looking to use them and they weren't on our list, so they have to be on the list. We don't need to.
And if I could ask, what qualifications does a prospective applicant have to meet in order to be considered to be a third party?
They have to provide all the certifications in the packet, the third-party certification from the state, They do the certified third-party agency listing with the Commonwealth as well. They provide their certification card to us, and then proof of insurance. Those are the qualifications.
So is there actual evidence or proof that these, that they're legally, they've got the qualifications needed to perform this inspection for these?
Yes, they gave us copies of their actual UCC card, and that is a directly from the state, that checklist. So, yeah.
So we need a motion to approve?
Yes.
Any second? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve Faulkner as a third-party electrical inspector for permits.
I'll second.
Any public comment? Yes, Ms. Ward?
Thank you. Quick question. So, for instance, last month, January, this is off the building inspection report from tonight, there were 34 electrical permits. So how does that work? You come in and you file for an electrical permit, and then when do you use the electrical inspector?
For any inspections that have to occur during construction of the electrical equipment.
Okay,
that's
so
just to cover our costs for issuing it.
Okay, so the 34 permits generated $2,288 of permit fees, but that's separate what the applicant would pay the inspector.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other public comment? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so we're now up to item number 19, final land development plan for a 10,000 square foot building addition and an 18,094 square foot new building for Blue Mountain Construction at 1,035 Saunders Lane.
This is a land development project near Jerakian. This is Saunders Lane here. The intersection of Saunders and Phoenixville Pike is out here. It's an existing building located on the site here. This proposal is to build a new building in this location and to add an addition to the existing building in this location. We'll be providing additional parking here, and around the other side of the building. This is a loading area. Stormwater management will be provided under the parking area here, and there are significant retaining walls that are going to need to be constructed around the perimeter to allow the grade changes for the new building, and those retaining walls required zoning hearing board approval, which was granted to the applicant. So that approval was given. The design has been reviewed for compliance with all township codes, and the Planning Commission has recommended approval by the Board of Supervisors. And the design engineer and the owner are here, and if you have any questions, any of us can answer.
The larger new building, is that going to become the auto repair facility, or is that something different, and the extension is going to be an addition to the current activity?
I believe the auto use is going to stay here, and this is going to be a flex building. Correct. Yes.
What does flex building mean?
It's going to be portion storage, portion office. However, the owner decides to split that up based on demand.
Is that whoever leases it would determine that?
Is that area now, isn't that a wooded, vegetated area?
Yes.
what requirements are there in land development to consider the loss of that within the town?
50% tree replacement on the site.
On the site or?
On the site.
On the site. Where will that be on this?
Well, there's a landscaping plan that shows them it's going to be basically all the green space around the site is full of trees. That's the only place to put them back.
Is that an access road at the bottom here?
There's an access drive here.
Where does that go to? Going left
This
to right,
goes back to craft buses, but it'll also provide access here and access here.
It's not one way though, it's both ways.
No, it's two way. Yeah, this access exists currently.
Are they dirt roads today?
No.
They're asphalt.
Yes.
This is the same project that removed the trees they weren't supposed to.
No.
I'm sitting here very confused.
We removed that project from the agenda tonight.
Okay.
This is not that project.
All right.
They wouldn't have waited 2 hours and 20 minutes.
I tried to say this afternoon, they already put the foundation on the ground, but no one bought it.
Can I ask some questions before you deliberate or just make some points? Any other,
Someone wants to make a motion first.
anything you want to share, John?
Well, really, Rick laid it out, it meets all the township ordinances and all that, there really wasn't any, it was pretty much just,
Okay.
I have a question related to, will this increase employment at the site? Will you be hiring new people for the additional space, whatever work you're doing?
No, do our tenant ends up being, but I would assume, absolutely.
So you don't have a tenant yet? Or
You don't have a tenant.
so you're building this at risk of being able to rent space, or?
Once our approvals are in place, we will start taking it to market. Well, until we have a firm in hand, I really can't offer to a tenant.
Yeah.
No, I can't tell them to do that.
Yes, Ms. Ford. A couple of comments, and I may be pulling from my memory bank from other municipalities, but I thought when something like this is approved that you see an elevation or you see what the building's going to look like, and I'm curious as to, if you approve this tonight, can they pretty much, paint it orange if they wanted to?
They pretty much can. The land development approval does not regulate aesthetics of the building, or what the building looks like, or what color they painted, or anything else. That's not the purpose of land development approval.
And typically zoning can't regulate aesthetics unless it's in a harbor district or some other historical. Yes, it's difficult to regulate aesthetics. In fact, there's many cases that talk about in unlawful zoning provisions that deal with aesthetics.
Okay, and then I would just ask, I appreciate all the time and attention that I know the supervisors put into, but before approving something like this, I would hope that, or anything, not just this one, but any land development, that you go out and walk the site and look at it before approving it. And until you do that, I would just ask that maybe you put it off if you haven't already done so. Just put it off until you can go over there and look at it. I do know once that lot is cleared, you're basically, my concern would be the lights for the parking lot, because now you have no buffer for the new homes over at Greystone. So
That's not correct. There is an additional piece of property between this property and Phoenixville Pike.
okay, but still, I would request that you not vote to approve it until you go out and you walk the site and look at it and might have some comments. So, thank you.
I would be happy to do that. I guess the only issue that I'm seeing right here is, and I know this because I have been out there, is that it does reside in the Gordon Natural Area Protected Habitat. And well, it says,
That's Roslyn.
am I looking at the wrong thing?
Yes.
This is Saunders Lane. Tell 35 Saunders.
Okay. Totally ignored me. I'm tired.
Rick, the county of Chester report on this mentioned the fact that there was more parking that was actually needed for the the developed space.
It's part of the zoning
Yeah.
ordinance.
Is there any way, I mean, they often have this in there, like, why don't we only ask or permit the required parking and allow further development down the road if needed,
Well,
versus just building more than is necessary?
Well, first of all, the zoning ordinance parking requirements are a minimum, not a maximum. And secondly, from a historical standpoint, most of the times that we build flex buildings, there's not enough parking because they put too much of a percentage in storage and not enough in office. So I think in this case, it's good that there's a little bit extra parking because we have run into numerous occasions where there isn't enough parking, and then you got to go through another development process if there's enough room to put anything in later anyhow. So I don't think this is parked excessively, and I think that little bit of overage that we have is a good buffer because, you know, the owner can say, well, I'm going to do, 70% storage and 30% office, and then he gets tenants come in and they want to do 45% office, and they don't have enough parking, and then you got to start from square one again. So I see the point. I don't want more impervious surface than we need, but I'd rather not have a parking issue too. And there's no other alternative for parking here. I mean, you can't park on Saunders Lane, you can't park on Phoenixville Pike. So I think this is actually a prudent design.
Tell me more about the stormwater infiltration design of the parking space there, the loading area. So we're losing the absorptive capacity of the wooded part of this property, and we're designed to a stormwater standard that we believe will make sure that the runoff from impervious surface is going to be well managed, restrained, etc.
Yeah,
a lot of what I've heard from residents is the stormwater standards that are in place don't reflect the kind of storms that we're seeing in the township in general now. So the kind of rainstorms that we're seeing, the design standards of stormwater are being overwhelmed and causing issues across the township. So help me understand why this is going to be well managed.
So here's the stormwater system being proposed, which is underneath the parking lot. It meets all our current stormwater design standards. We cannot physically design stormwater facilities for the storms we've had in the past 2 years. Some of those storms have exceeded 500-year storm capacity. We cannot design for those. If we have them periodically, we're going to have them, and it's going to be a problem. But we cannot go to a developer and say, you have to develop this site to 1,000-year storm capacity. Nobody would be able to build anything anywhere. So we have designed up to 100-year storm capacity as required by the code. We're infiltrating the 2-year storm back into the ground. That's not leaving the site. And the total stormwater discharge from the site is less than currently existing. So there is an improvement in the stormwater situation on the site by using this redesigned facility. There is an overall improvement, but again, there's a whole nother realm of stormwater design that if these massive storms continue for a long period of time, it's going to have to be rethought by engineers and everybody else, and we don't have the capability to do that right now.
What would you describe to be a 100-year storm? I mean, how many inches per hour? How is that rate?
8.34 inches of rain in a 24-hour period.
How many?
8.34.
Make a motion for approval.
One last question. When you look at the aerial on this, and if you do go look at the site, it seems like isn't there a lot of vegetation and trees already around the perimeter? How are they going to put in replacing 50% if half of it's or most of it's already?
Yeah, on the picture that has the red where the trees are, and they identify each of the trees, the poplars and oaks.
Okay, this is the landscape plan right here.
So is it 50% replacement of a mature tree only? Is that the requirement?
Yeah, it's above a 3-inch caliber. So you can see they're putting in trees virtually every place they fit on the site, including islands, there really is no more room to put any more trees than what's being replaced.
Okay.
If they were skimping, we could make them put some more in. You'd have to put them on top of the roof.
Green roof
Well, that's
is
a good
bad
idea.
deal.
Yeah, what about one of those? Yeah. That helps with stormwater runoff.
Buy something, yeah.
Well, that's actually made me think about solar panels. So we've asked TrueMark going to the conditional use here and there about, hey, can you do a building that can support that? So the question here for this applicant would be, will that building design be capable of supporting solar panels?
Here's, I mean, Kristen can address this better than me. This is not a land development issue.
I understand. I'm just asking the question in public with the gentleman here who's the property owner and asking for his consideration for when he does the building design, whether it's orange or whatever color he wants to paint it. Maybe he could also think about making the roof capable of handling solar panels. Thank you, sir.
Yes, I believe we could design the building.
Thank you.
Depending on the look.
All right, appreciate that.
Now, can I do it?
Yeah.
I'll make a motion.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
We have a second. Any other public comment? Yes, Dr. White, come on.
Dr. White, West Goshen. I know it meets all the ordinances and the rules of the township. I was just concerned about the loss of the wooded area. I don't think we can make the developers keep that, but correct me if I'm wrong, maybe I misunderstood reading. On the top of that picture, beyond the upper parking lot to the west side, I guess that would be the west side towards Phoenix Hill Pike, is there still going to be a strip of buffer?
Yeah, but it's not owned by this property owner.
Okay, so there's, yeah, okay, so there still will be some woods along that street.
Some of it's already been cleared for the realignment of the roadway, so not very much.
Not very much.
Yeah, but there is land there. It doesn't directly abut Phoenix Hill Pike.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any other public comment? Hearing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can I just ask, so does that mean that they have all the permits, so like, these folks could start cleaning?
If they want to start clearing tomorrow, yes.
And they have all the road.
As long as it's done in accordance with the approved plan, yes.
Mr. Purnell needs to leave a little bit early this evening to attend to his lovely wife Sheila. And I wanted to recognize her. Excuse me, John. I didn't realize you guys were having a conversation. What I was saying is that Mr. Purnell needs to leave a little bit early tonight to be with his wife. And I wanted to acknowledge her for the several years that she served on the historical committee and has been able to contribute. As one of her things that she enjoyed doing was being a member of that committee. So I just wanted to thank her and acknowledge her service to the township as well.
Good night.
You are our best. Okay, we are down to public comment.
Mr. Brockett submitted a request to be on the agenda tonight, so we'd like to address him.
Come on up.
For over a decade, I have complained about snow throwback onto my walkway and only my walkway on Sylvan Road between Basin and Warren Roads. Madam Chair was sent a video clearly showing that a snowplow truck clearly came up Sylvan, not clearing the road to the curb, until it suddenly veered to the curb as it approached my property, throwing snow onto my walkway. I also sent a picture to Madam Chair showing snow throwback of approximately 14 feet. The only conclusion that can be drawn is that these incidents were intentional. Mr. Lalonde and Mr. Woodward have been aware of the incidents that I've been complaining about for 10 years and have done nothing to correct the situation. Therefore, I believe they are guilty of harassment. Also, I have described that the throwback of clumps of ice and snow onto my walkway endangered the public welfare. In Pennsylvania, if you allow a situation that repeatedly endangered the public welfare to continue, you can be charged with reckless endangerment. The failure of Mr. Lalonde and other township officials to illuminate this hazard for over a decade would lead one to believe they are guilty of reckless endangerment. The failure of township officials to eliminate this hazard and the failure of the Board of Supervisors to hold anyone accountable for these actions shows that there has been a dereliction of duty by both the Board of Supervisors and township officials. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Any other public comment? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Margie was.
Okay, Margie, it wasn't planned, but.
So new board will request section 1802 fire hydrants and water supply. I believe our way of charging just a very few residents for their fire hydrants is not in compliance and conformance with the second-class township code. I would ask that you ask for legal review again. The second-class township code specifically states 3 ways in which municipalities may charge for fire hydrants and water supply. And the way the township has chosen is section 3C, which all assessments for fire hydrant protection shall be collected by the tax collector under section 13. I'm sorry. The Board of Supervisors may pay the cost for fire protection out of the general township fund, which is the way we have chosen to do it. So I believe the ordinance that our township relies on is not in conformance with the law. Over the years, I have heard of many instances where we have repealed ordinances, such as the chicken ordinances, because they simply weren't in conformance and they were in conflict with the law, and we have repealed them. So I'm asking that you look into this issue once again. Thank you.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Sean?
Second.
John?
All in favor?